home of Preston Nichols, famous for his work at the Montauk Project. Crazy, mad scientist, and we're about to enter the lair of Preston Nichols. So come and join us as we track through the many, many inches of snow up here. And this place is just loaded with equipment. Every single room is full of experiments, things from his experiments. And as many of you know, Preston Nichols is the scientist from the Montauk Project, and he was the one that was operating the trip chair. Today we'll be talking to him about his work, but especially we'll be talking about his new work, what he's up to now with his sound equipment, working with new frequencies and how we use those frequencies. But in here there's just like rows and rows and rows of equipment in every direction that you see. What an incredible feeling there is here. So we're going to come through here, we're going to speak to Preston in this room, which is where he has his sound lab set up, and we're going to have an experience of that today. And here he is. Mr. Preston Nichols. Thank you so much, Preston Nichols, for allowing us to do this interview today in your wonderful laboratory. And you are so well known for your work with the Montauk Project, but also I know that there's so much that you've been doing the last few years around your research into sound and frequencies and wormholes. So we would love to speak to you today about your latest work. But just for the people that are not aware of all of the work that you have done in this very illustrious lifetime, if you could just give us a brief about your past, and then let's jump into all of your new work.
Well, basically, education is a associate's degree, a BSEE, a MS in electrophysics, and a classified degree in what's known as quantum electrodynamics, which basically is quantum electronics. And I basically started out as a recording engineer working on the Phil Spector. That was after I did a lot of recordings locally in East Islip, using a Berlin Concertone and a Viking, a Minneapolis tape deck to make many recordings on. Most of the Four Seasons recordings were done on those things. And I then graduated through a professor I had at the local community college to CBS Records, and eventually working for Phil Spector. He had just bought NBC Studio, I think he called it Studio A on West 57th Street, and he had me rebuild the big studio. And then we did many test recordings in it, and they came out fantastic. But the so-called recording engineers, none of them are engineers really, looked at the setup I made and said, we can't run that. It doesn't fit any standards. And I told Phil, look, I wanted you to tell me what standards you wanted to build to, but he told me, build whatever I feel like. So I became the engineer for that studio and got to record a lot of the top rock acts of the mid to late 60s and into the 70s. After doing that, I basically was paralleling into the industrial military complex because I didn't like the way the mob was infiltrating the record business. And I transitioned from that into industrial military contracting, where I eventually found myself working out at Montauk Point through Brookhaven National Laboratories on Long Island, and found myself on this screwball project, which was known as Project Red Hawk, was the actual name, but it's popularly become called the Montauk Project, which started with the early stealth you would know as the Philadelphia experiment. We developed the electromagnetic bottle to hide any sort of a ship in. Up to that point, it was thought that the mind of man had no sensitivity to electromagnetics, which everyone learned quite to their mistake. Yeah, the mind of man is quite sensitive to electromagnetics. And from there, research was done, which I was involved with, of how to interface the mind of man to electromagnetic systems. The idea was you could fly your fighter plane by thought. Pure thought would fly the plane or drive the ship. But it evolved into essentially a mind control device, which is what they were really looking for. They wanted to be able to feed a program into an early computer, flip a switch, and everybody would respond to it. That was what they wanted. They never got that. They never could find a, like a universal psychic signature for all humans. You would have to target each person individually. The individual targeting worked very well. Then it was discovered that since basically the project was nothing but a mind amplifier, that's all it was a mind amplifier. If the person in the input network could think of other times and fully flesh out the time in his head, this machine had the capability of generating that time, generating a vortex of different space and time. And that's what the Montauk Project eventually evolved into, a time machine. And yes, it worked. It didn't work all that well, but it worked. Many people got lost, but it did work. That in a nutshell is what the Montauk Project is about. Of course, there's all sorts of information on the net. There's, you can get my book, Montauk Project Experiments in Time, and the other sequels, which are just a bunch of metaphysical gobbledygook saying, yeah, this thing is true because you won't find any actual documentation on it.
So during your time working there, I understand that you were working with the military.
Mm-hmm.
It was a top secret project.
Oh, yes.
But you also had off-planet beings working with you as well,
Mm-hmm.
aliens.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And can you tell us a bit about your interaction with them?
It wasn't all that much. First of all, the aliens didn't like me. They kept calling me a Pleiad dog, whatever that is.
Meaning that you're from the Pleiades, perhaps?
Well, there is some reason, some false pseudo-evidence to support the idea that I was abducted, taken to the Pleiades, the planet around the sixth sister star, and my body was reformed, and the original me went bye-bye. Because the original me was very sick. I had cerebral palsy. I couldn't walk straight, period. I had a lot of trouble using tools. And then I was abducted at 17. It all went away overnight. And, the doctors told my parents I'd be dead at 24 from a heart murmur. All of a sudden, at 17, that disappeared.
What happened after Montauk?
Well, I was still working for quite a while in the military-industrial establishment. Then, basically, my parents got sick. And what it turned out, I was making a good salary as an engineer. But that salary wouldn't pay for health aides to come in and take care of my sick mother. So I volunteered for layoff to take care of my sick mother, and we all lived on my parents' social insecurity. Notice how I said that?
Insecurity.
Yes. Although at that time, it was pretty secure. We all lived well on pensions. My mother had a teacher's pension. My father had a number of pensions from the military-industrial establishment also, and we lived pretty well. Although I was still out on the market as a consultant. Then, by 93, I had fully retired. That's when I got involved with putting together the radio station. Of course, I retired. Then I began to work hard, and went through to about 2000, where I was, running, doing the technical work for the radio station that I built, I own part of, and doing consultant work. And by that time, my mother had died, and then I had the assignment of keeping my father from killing himself. And he died in 91. He died on 9/10/91. I mean 2001, I'm sorry. I'm getting a little confused. There's a foghorn in the brain. And at that point, I had decided that I didn't want to stay in the house. I only had basically 2 weeks out of that house, when I was married, and then my wife was killed 2 weeks on the honeymoon after the marriage. And I never found another one since. And basically, I moved up here. I moved up here in 2003, and I was, 46, 03. I was 59 at that time. At that time, I was living in this house, trying to heat this barn, and got up one day at Christmas time in 2003, looked out the window.
10 years ago, almost exactly to today, yeah.
And I saw these huge bird tracks. I mean,
the track of the bird,
the
feet
bird,
was this
yes.
book.
This freaking big bird. And it scared the crap out of my dog.
Like three prongs?
And I started to ask around. I ended up at a Native American meeting. I have pictures of the tracks, which you can put on film if you want later.
Please, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And basically, one of the old timers looks at it and says, "That's the Grand Thunderbird." And I said, "What the hell is that?" And he says, "That's this big bird that's friendly to Native Americans. And if a thunderbird lands on your property, you are a shaman." He said, "I can't deny that I'm a shaman." At that point, I went from being a scientist interested in metaphysics to being almost a pure spiritualist. But I'm using science to study the spiritualism and to understand it even deeper.
Did you shift also in your concept of what you believe God is, or did you actually have a concept of God?
That's actually a very interesting concept. There was recently a program on TV called Through the Wormhole.
Oh, yes.
Produced by the Sci-Fi and the Science Channel and the Discovery Channel. I was watching that, and I realized, they're right. See, what that premise is that all this is some sort of a computer projection out of some sort of a supercomputer somewhere, which Duncan and I had run across years before that.
Is that the great AI in the sky?
Whatever you want to call it. One day, I run into this character every so often that calls himself Preston of the Future. He looks like me, he has my DNA, he has my fingerprints. And he hands me a CD recording, sound recording of Justin Haywood's Broken Dreams, a CD with that on. And he says, "Play that and meditate on that noise at the end of the recording." And I do it. And I mentally come out at that time in the future. Originally, back in 2006, it was 2012. And what it looked like, this giant wave, whatever you want to call it, rolled through and basically destroyed everything. And that noise was the recording equipment being destroyed. And how the recording was recovered, I don't know. Now, since that has happened, that's been pushed ahead. We've managed to push that event, now it looks like in the 2020s, that event. See, what appears to happen, but let me first go into what I call the Tabor sequence. As I meditated on that noise, I found myself in the future, and I traveled to where the source was. The source was the center of the galaxy. Well, it looked like the center of the galaxy had exploded, and this super wave was emanating out of the center of the galaxy. Of course, we're on the edge, so we'll be one of the last ones to be hit by it. And I then traveled back, and I found at the center of the galaxy this huge vortex, this huge donut. You could look at it as a wormhole with a white hole on one end and a black hole on the other end, and they're coupled together, in like a heavenly sexual state or something. Now what that's going to do is the energy is going to be pulled by the white hole out of the black hole, and it's going to circulate like a particle accelerator, but building up energy as long as it's running. So now we're looking at a artifact at the center of our galaxy, which has, as far as we're concerned, it has infinite energy, infinite intelligence. And what is that? That's God. And I go up, I find this being, and I approach it, and I said, "Who are you?" And this being said, I'm going to call him he or she, I'm not sure if there is any difference between the race of beings like this. Said, "I'm the beginning and the end. You can ask me any question you want. You're the first one to arrive here directly." And I started building a rapport with this being. Then I transferred from the broken dreams to an even better connection on a piece of music called Mob Lost, My Fatherland by Bedrich Smetana. Very beautiful piece of classical music. It turns out that Smetana was sick in those days. He was in the asylum, not that he was insane or anything. That's where they took care of folks. He died, went and met God, and then came back, and God told him to write this piece of music. And a section of it is called Tabor the Great. I thought it was Tabor. I was doing a telephone radio interview, and I talked just of this. And after the interview, this gentleman with a very thick European accent calls me up and says, "You the man that talks to God?" "I don't know." He says, "Well, you were calling him Tabor. It's actually Tabor. And that's God in Europe. Ancient time God. The first single monotheistic God was Tabor." And I go meet again. And yeah, I'm known as Tabor. That's one of the names. And he's been building, I now call him he. We've been having a lot of meditations right on that bed using Lost. And also I get a great connection through Handel's Messiah. The Hallelujah chorus takes me right to Tabor. And Tabor tells me that although, and I will say this, a lot of Christians won't like it. Tabor says Christ was not God, but Christ was the highest evolved being closest to God from the Logos or the Holy Spirit. And after seeing this projection, this computer business, first thing I remember, The voice is mechanical. So I turn on again, go to the board, say, are you a computer? Yes, sir, I'm a computer. I'm what you know as a computer. The idea I'm getting from this being is that about 5 million years ago, we had a great war in the galaxy. We had the Sagittarian galaxy, which doesn't really exist anymore, and the Milky Way galaxy, and they were invading. And the two advanced intelligences in the two galaxies called a truce and decided to settle the war by building this supercomputer and making all these computer simulations, starting out with trillions of simulations. We've now come down to 7, and I think we may have come down to 5 recently now, simulations. And their thought is the final simulation is the solution to the war. Except the joke is on them. The computer software has quite a bit of errors in it. Because we should not be as greedy beings as we are. Because although we have 23 gene pairs, in the top group of gene pairs are our mentality. And yes, we need the negative traits to push ahead, to advance, but we're supposed to have a 24th gene pair that brings in the altruism, that keeps all that negativity in control. Only thing is, most people, that 24th gene pair is collapsed into the 23rd. And recently, medical science has verified this. They say we're supposed to have 24 gene pairs, and the first is collapsed into the second. That was on one of the discovery programs. And I realized, hey, whether it's 24, 23, or 1 or 2, it's the same thing. It depends on which end of the genome you call. You call it. And when we get most humans with that genetic, that genetic damage repaired, this will then become what the theologians talk of the kingdom of God. And we have a piece of music. First of all, let's go into something else now. I'm sure you've all seen the Stargate series. That Stargate is real. I've seen it. And
which Stargate have you seen? There's many Stargates, no?
I'm talking about the physical one that Roland Emmerich emulated in his movies, and Rick Anderson emulated in the series.
And where did you see that?
Up at Boston. Up at, what's the big lab tied to MIT? I can't think of the name.
The MIT.
Yeah. Lincoln Labs. They had the original Stargate, that big metal stone ring, was up at Lincoln Labs on the Air Force Base by MIT. And I was taken up there and shown it because when I was working with DARPA, part of my assignment was to work with that group. Try to figure out further, how to use this ancient freaking big ring. And when they first turned it on, this guy comes through the Stargate with 2 master CDs. It gets handed to the government. Now, why the government didn't bury it, I don't know. But the government then handed the Roland Emmerich and told him to use it in his movie Stargate. He was privileged to see the Stargate in operation also. And that's why if you watch that movie, first thing you'll notice, the action doesn't quite match the music. That's because they were matching the action to the music that they already had. Now, each piece of that music, each track, 1 through 24, represents the 24th gene pair genome, and that last 24th gene, that's altruism. Then from 25 to 30, that's like a fixative pattern of frequencies for different races of man. Number 30 happens to be ours, and I think number 27 is yours. You know, it's for the black race. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to go into any sort of segregation. I don't believe in that. You all have beautiful, lovable minds. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. It doesn't matter where you have your sex organs. Everyone has a beautiful mind.
How was it that you got into the side of the frequency of the music, and how that was opening up doorways, portals?
Well, basically, at this point, I already had the connection to this character, Preston of the future.
And this guy, Preston of the future, would just literally walk into your 3D life here,
Yep.
like me, and you would recognize this person as Preston of the future?
That's why I got his fingerprints, and I got some of, you know, he bled. He got a cut, and I blotted it, and I sent that out, and it matched me perfectly. The fingerprints on the glass and the blood on the napkin matched me 100%.
And what future is he from? What year do you know?
I don't know. I don't think it's that far into the future. I think it's like maybe another 30 years after whatever this big calamity that's coming is. I think he's from that time.
Is he
after
older
the
than you now?
No, he looks exactly the same. Exactly the same. That tells me that yes, time travel becomes usable, and I probably do eventually succeed on age regression. Or it's a clone body. I don't know which, but basically, after playing the, the steel phonograph record with DARPA, and kibitzing with the general that, hey, what kind of a joke is this?
Sorry, where did you get the steel phonographic record from?
That supposedly came to me through DARPA from the Chaco Canyon caves. That was in the cave sitting on a pedestal with a little indentation in the rock with what looked like a phonograph cartridge. And the record had 20 pi on it. That's all it had on it. And I figured, okay, pi represents an RPM, rotation. So it's probably 20 times pi rotations, which comes out to 66 2/3 RPM. So I took a 78 turntable and slowed it down to 66, and Stargate music. Why the hell am I playing this?
Stargate, the movie, the TV serial.
No,
Series.
the movie.
Yes,
the movie. And I go to the local record shop, buy a copy of the Stargate CD. I use that to adjust the speed on the turntable and match it perfectly, and it matches perfectly. So I get very interested in this music. Then around 2000, I was sitting in my living room in East Islip. Actually, no, it was 2002. I'm sorry, it was 2002. And I was listening on the predecessor to this sound system in this room to the Stargate CD. The dog is asleep on my lap, and I'm sitting back listening, trying to figure out, okay, what's with this music? The tonalities on it are perfect. And next thing I know, dog gets excited. I open my eyes. There's these two guys standing in my living room with some sort of a strange suits on them, uniform, whatever. I say, who are you? He says, we represent a group you know as the Wingmakers. So I said, okay. And then they proceed to tell me that the problem I was having with the amplifiers is that I had the phasing wrong in the feedback. Correct the phasing. Then they hand me this briefcase full of papers, CD-ROMs, and said something to the effect, this is the next step on your planet here of digital sound. So, okay. I take everything over to Computer Associates, And I talked to a friend of mine, Bill, at Computer Associates. Hey, what do you think of this? And a couple of days later, he called me and said, you know, that's some sort of a sound processor. Of course, they'd already told me that the CD has a lot of distortion in the high end because there's only one sample at 20 kilohertz. And the phase gets distorted as you go from 10K to 20K. And that this program, you put it in a DSP setup, it will correct that distortion. What it will do, identify all the fundamentals and then group the harmonics and then apply sacred mathematics to align the phase of the harmonics to the fundamentals. And it does just that. It takes a CD digital recording and makes it sound like the master tape, from analog. The processing they gave me is fantastic. And after we put it together and got it working, I was actually able to sell the system to AMD, American Micro Devices, which is Computer Associates' parent company. And in 2000 or 2001 Christmas time, I don't remember which, AMD was going to put out a chipset to replace all the existing chipsets in these digital players. Next thing I know, we get a letter on the patent that the patent's been seized by the military. Something to do with their sound weapon. We had done in 200 kilobytes of code what it took them terabytes to do. So all of a sudden, we now can't sell the thing. It was already on AMD's website, the next step in digital audio. Of course, now it's probably passé. And I sat with my finger, where, after that. But still, and I then started to work with these guys from 2755, they told me. And their claim is they made that recording, sent it through the Stargate as through space and time to the present time, and the intent was to elevate genetically mankind to where we become altruistic and all this war garbage stops and the greed stops and we become a society like Gene Roddenberry wanted to have.
Why would they send it through as a science fiction film, which is really only going to be seen by so few people? Why was it sent in that form, do you think?
No, it was sent, the music was brought through by the guy, I forget his name, and it was handed to the government up in Massachusetts, and he told the government that if you release this and get the people interested in it, this will be the next evolutionary step in mankind. And somebody in the government wanted it, but they still wanted to keep the Stargate itself a secret. I can't talk much about the Stargate. But if you want to see what the Stargate is, watch the movie or the TV series.
The Stargate that you've seen, that is like an ancient, real Stargate, three-dimensional Stargate. It's not something that was recreated by the contemporary military.
I was told, as the movie originally shown, it was found in Egypt by the pyramids. And for a long time they didn't know what it was. Now,
do you think there's several of them throughout the world now?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Ones that have been recreated even perhaps, or the original ancient ones?
Some of the minerals and the metals we don't have. I would like to say at this time, my mission is to, research the age regression, which I'm always looking for volunteers to participate. And I also, my primary business right now, besides repairing theater amplifiers for the state, is I have people come up here, they lay on their couch, and I perform like a shaman, playing them different pieces of music to get them into a meditative state. It's musical meditation. And I don't think we have to really go into the healing aspects of it, because the medical profession has already acknowledged the healing aspects of the music. I think at this point we ought to now take you on a trip.
Great, I'd love to take a trip.
Machine.
Yes.
Before we do that, let's explain how it works.
Okay.
Notice around the room we got 1, 2, 3, 4 speaker boxes.
Uh-huh.
They are connected to vacuum tube amplifiers of my special design. I think at this point, let's go into how the actual amplifier works. I call it the quantum well design. The quantum physics I deal with is the physics of electrons and light going between the parallel realities. We have 7 parallel realities, which we're one of. This physical reality we can touch.
You mean like 7 different Earth worlds?
Whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the quantum physics I work with. Now, in that, I went into a very, very deep study of electrons between the conductive state, which is a particle, and the vacuum state, which is a wave. You look at it as the particle is a little ball. And when it gets launched into a vacuum, since there's no atoms to jump from to, it unrolls itself and becomes like a sheet traveling through the vacuum. A massless, thicknessless sheet traveling. This wave aspect of the electron is very special. When you get an electron wave, it literally floats in hyperspace. Now, if you can take the space that the wave is floating in and twist it, spin it, rotate it, you can now create a vortex. That vortex will go through all parallel realities. That's contingent to us here. And if you take the age-old pentode vacuum tube and you bias it correctly with the voltages on the element, you can literally take that wave that's in the tube and spin it. And it forms like a vortex, a quantum singularity, a white hole, whatever you want to call it, and connects the signal flow through all 7 realities. Now, how this works. When I was working for my PhD, I learned how to bias the vacuum tubes to maximize this effect. You know, a lot of people are saying today tubes sound better than transistors. I'm sure you've heard that.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Because the vacuum tube actually produces, for want of better words, colloquially, life energies. Those, the life energies is electron and photonic functions going through all 7 parallel realities. That's what life energy really is. And the vacuum tubes will amplify it. Now, how this system works is in some worlds, the information flows from the speaker to the listener. In other parallels, it flows from the listener back to the speaker. It goes into the amplifier, into this quantum well, and it gets all rolled together and spread through all 7 parallel realities, which your mind operates in at least 7 parallel realities. That's the nature of mankind. The soul, the spirit, is the image of us in other parallels. So now we have a function where you can use music to spin your mind into all 7 parallels, and at the same time it crosses the music with your function, produces another function which you will be perfectly resonant with and can go very deep in the meditation. And from that you can then spread out into the other realities consciously. That's what this equipment does. Now, we have the 4 satellite, their speaker system. They're connected to vacuum tubes. They go roughly high bass to the full tweeter treble. Now you'll see we got these big black boxes. There's 3 here. They have 18-inch subwoofers in them, which connect to a 2,000 watt amplifier. That's solid state. Then there's two more there on either side of the bed. They're 15-inch subwoofers, but they're run a little bit differently. You see, they're wrapped up in foam and cloth and pillows. That's because there's a board running between the top of the two of them. The cones shape the upper board, which is suspended, and that board then couples into the 4x4 that goes across the two and shakes the bed. You can actually feel down to 5 hertz on that bed. And then you have these cabinets. Each one of these has a pair of 12s in them, dissimilar 12s with different resonant frequencies. And those are driven by a 500 watt amplifier. These are driven by a 1000 watt amplifier. And the bass is superb. You can actually feel the vibrations in the floor of the Riverside Church or Prince Albert Hall on that organ, that big organ.
So you're saying that there are literally seven worlds, 7 Earths. So you and I are sitting right now on 6 other planets having the same conversation. They're
Not
similar.
maybe
they're
exactly the same, but close.
Mm-hmm. So they're parallel in structure, parallel in what's happening, time zones.
Well, some of them are not fully physical, like this is.
Mm-hmm. So they also exist on different dimensional planes?
I don't know. Theoretically, there's 21 dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
21 freedoms of space.
Yeah.
Theoretically.
So what I will
Which of course is 3 times 7.
So what I will be doing when I'm laying down is I will be literally opening up my space, my consciousness.
If you allow it.
And I will be spreading out into the other 6 places where I exist.
And at that point, it's your playpen.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want.
How long does it take for you to actually feel the effect? Is it instantaneous or a few minutes?
Sometimes.
Okay. Well,
I guess it has a lot to do with how open the person is and how close to being there they already are.
Okay. What would I experience in any way? Physically, emotionally, mentally? Is there a sense of bliss or?
If you want.
Right. I'd like to experience bliss, thanks. Okay, let's to the music.
You're listening to Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake.
Swan Lake, yes, and
The finale, The Storm.
The Storm. So I had a series of visuals. I was definitely feeling a different vibration, a different way that my body was literally creating itself. It felt like it was shaken up and restructured into perhaps a more looser structure, a more expanded structure. And you said to me that you saw me as a time traveler.
Yeah.
So how do you see that, and what gives you that information, and what does it mean too?
Well, what it means is your time reference is somewhat plastic at this point. You gotta remember, you're interacting with all this equipment right down to the CD player. And if your time reference is not stable, is slightly plastic, what happens is it makes the CD change its timing. And I can hear that in the music. And
So my plasticity, my timing is affecting the equipment.
Yeah, affecting this.
And you could hear that difference.
And that basically means that you have traveled through time itself. You physically, mentally gone places in time. Why or how, I don't know. But, you do. This is one of the ways we recognize, some of the Montauk boys. Because most of the Montauk boys are time travelers. And we hear the shift in the playback of the CD based upon the shifts that they're going through in their personal time reference being driven by the music, since this particular CD, which is Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, recorded in 1962 at Boston Symphony Hall with Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops, who happened to be a friend of mine. I was at the recording session. That was one of the early recording sessions I attended, with the high school.
Mm-hmm. Are there many people that are time travelers? Is that
is more than you think.
Mm-hmm.
It's relatively rare. It's probably 1 out of about 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mostly men. You'd be unusual as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly men.
So that's something that perhaps that I'm able to become more conscious of doing this type of work. So when people come and do private sessions with you, people can contact Preston Nichols. We'll be leaving information at the
Right.
bottom of this YouTube interview. People can come up here and do private sessions with you, and they can perhaps go deeper into their own potential, right?
Yeah.
So all of the equipment that we have here, so all of the receivers that are here along the wall, this is a radionics.
Yeah, in radionics, the idea is you're using electronic systems to amplify the life energies. And since the life energies is based upon the quantum aspect of electrons and photons, any piece of vacuum tube equipment that has a tuned circuit in it will act as a radionics repeater amplifier. It will absorb the energies in and then repeat it out. As long as the equipment is run in the state it's in, without changing any vacuum tubes, at least 3 or 4 times. And these will all run 3 or 4 times. And it's special for me because I poured over each one and going through each one personally. So this is part of the gain I have for my own meditations. All this equipment in this building, I'm just moving it here so it's more intimately connected in the equipment in this room. This is the RF side, this is the audio side. We have 3 Hammond organs here, tone wheel organs, and they have tube amplifiers, and each one of these things has about 120 resonant circuits in it. Each one of those has maybe about 8 or 9 resonant circuits in it. So we get a balance between the bass side and the higher frequency side. Your mind processes up to 30 megahertz. That's your highest processing speed. This is why this is all what we call HF equipment, which means it's between broadcast band, 1 meg and 30 megs is what it operates at. And it gives you quite a boost.
I do feel very boosted after that. I feel like,
well, the amplifier system does that also. I'm trying. This side is going to be the power. This side here is going to be tuned up for benevolence and altruism. Because you can take.
So that will take that 24th DNA strand and pump it out of the 23rd, right? Or from the second to the first.
What I'm doing here is I'm putting altruism into the Earth grid.
Sending it out from this place.
Yeah. See, each tuner, each tuning dial, you can tune like like the knob on a radionics device.
And you're tuning it into altruism.
Yeah.
So just describe to me what altruism is for you. It is.
Well, you have basically 2 opposites. You have greed and avarice. That's the negative side of the emotions. Altruism is the positive side, where you really don't care about yourself. You're more concerned about others. We say, we love you. We don't mean we want to put you on that bed and do something nasty to you. We love your spirit. We love your soul. We love your intelligence, your consciousness. There's nothing physical, real world even involved in the idea of love as we talk of it in the shamanistic trade and a lot of the religious trades, especially a lot of the Christians have a lot of love.
So for our last farewell to our YouTube audience, and of course people can come to our symposium in 2014, Multiple Realities in the Meta Center. Please look up lovenowmovement.org for our upcoming events. For our last farewell to the audience, what would you like to tell people about our future?
Well, we're on the cusp right now. We're on the razor edge. We could go either way. We could go into a total negative society, which we're now approaching, or we can turn it around and go into a society of love, you know, true unrequited, unassigned love. And I'm working towards getting it into the love side.
Thank you so much, Preston Nichols, for